Before we get into our agenda for the evening, I have the blessed privilege of both welcoming you to this call and reminding you that we believe in language justice. And so I get the pleasure of introducing you to DeBlois, who you should be able to see up in the chat and on the screen. So if you have any ASL needs, definitely be paying attention to the screen. He's going to be signing all night. And it's a reminder to our beloved program participants and panelists to speak slowly so that our ASL interpreter in particular can do his great work. I also have the privilege of having two comrades on the call, Kathy and Brenda, who will be doing Spanish to English translation. So I'm going to toss it to you all just to talk a little bit about what that's going to look like this evening. So Brenda, Kathy, I'll toss it to you real quick.
Hi, thank you once again for having us. Kathy and I are going to be on the line. Yeah. And I just wanted to turn my video, even though we will be here, you won't be able to see me, although you'll be listening to everything. In case people start talking really quickly, which is a really important topic, we're just going to turn on our camera on and do this signal, which just means like stretch out your words. So we really want to capture everything that you're saying and communicate that in a very, as much as we can, but just slow it down for us. The other thing that we can't do is we can't interpret multiple people at the time. So if you can interpret one person at a time, I know the conversations get really vivid, but we lose a lot and we really just can't do it. So if it comes down to it, you might see me like raise my finger, or I might send Ashley a chat, and she's a wonderful facilitator will hold that part down for us. We're both wearing headphones, so we should be able to hear you, but in case we have audio issues, we will do this, which means just, speak a little bit louder or adjust your microphone so we can hear you and be able to capture everything that you're saying. And these signals are also used when we do it on the ground, so just carry those into your organizing roles. And just to shout out that, we're also interpreting from a colonized language to another colonized language, and knowing that we're even Spanish speakers, there's a lot of indigenous languages out there that don't captivate, and we're not able to interpret into that. So just also acknowledging that even though we're doing this, we still got a long ways to go. But yeah, that's it. If you have any questions or anything, send us a message on the chat. Awesome. And then turn off my video.
Thank you, Brenda. So for those of you that can't hear Brenda, it's because there's some technology that we need to fix. So if you are on your computer, you should see a button at the bottom of your screen that says interpretation. If you click that button, you should see English and Spanish. And if you're an English speaker, you should click English. If you're a Spanish speaker, you should click Spanish. Once you do that, then you'll be able to hear the simultaneous translation. So if anyone happens to speak in Spanish, then you'll hear Brenda interpreting on the English line. And for those of you that are Spanish speakers, you will hear Kathy interpreting on the Spanish side. So if you couldn't hear Brenda, don't worry, you didn't mess up. All you have to do is go to the interpretation button and click English. And if there's any point in tonight's call where that translation is needed, it will happen there. Thank you all so much. And thanks, seriously thanks to this interpretation team. They came through at the super last minute to make sure that we had an accessible call. So we're grateful for you all. Last but not least, we want you to use the chat box. So for those of you that are on your computers or on your phones, but using the Zoom app, definitely feel free to respond in the chat box. Also know that in the next couple of seconds, we will start our simultaneous live streaming on Highlander's Facebook page.
El live stream.
So once that happens, I will drop the link to the Facebook Live down in the chat. If we do hit 1,000 people, no one else will be able to join the Zoom. It will max out. So anyone that potentially does get locked out, you can just go over to Facebook and you can watch it on the live stream there. So we'll be dropping that here in a second. With that, I have the honor of tossing it to the amazing Courtland Cox from the SNCC Legacy Project to sort of tell us why we're on the phone tonight.
Okay, good. Good afternoon. I guess everybody can hear me. Well, good evening to those on the East Coast, and to those of you on the West Coast, good afternoon. My name is Courtland Cox. I'm a veteran of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, known as SNCC. and chair of the SNCC Legacy Project. The theme of today's webinar is an intergenerational conversation about a multi-generational struggle. It is important for all of us who engage in the struggle today to know that each generation has benefited from the valiant struggles of the generation before it. I know that those of us who engaged in what has been called the 1960s movement benefited from the struggle of those who fought or lived through World War II. People like Medgar Evers, Amzie Moore, Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, Hartman Turnbow, and countless others who were engaged in organizing throughout the South. Those of us who engaged in the sit-ins, freedom rides, and organizing to get people to register to vote across the South were also able to do so because it was the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and professors from Howard University Law School who were able to fashion a legal argument in the 1954 Supreme Court decision, Brown versus Board of Education, that ended segregation as the law of the land. The generations that preceded SNCC not only took action to end segregation and Jim Crow in America, they also provided us with the informational wealth that allowed us to continue where they left off. They knew that the struggle was going to be multi-year and multi-generational. My hope is that the SNCC veterans who've been engaged in the struggle for over 60 years have not only fought the good fight, but worked with the next generations to continue the long-distance race for human and civil rights. Throughout the past 60 years, a steady ally in the struggle for human and civil rights has been the Highlander Center. As far back as 1961, Highlander was the place that SNCC staff went to learn to conduct citizens training classes. Jim Foreman, SNCC's executive director, sent staff from Southwest Georgia, Mississippi, Arkansas, and other places throughout the South to learn the training that had been developed by Highlander, beginning with Martin Luther King Jr. in 1955. We owe a great debt of thanks to the director of Highlander Center, the legendary Miles Horton. We also have to thank Highlander staff Bernice Robinson and Esau Jenkins for their contributions to SNCC staff growth and development. As we can see, Highlander traditions continues today under the leadership of Ashley Woodard Henderson. The collaboration between the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the Highlander Center was both then and continues now. As you may or may not know, today was to be the first day of the SNCC 60th anniversary convening. However, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we had to postpone the scheduled event. I'm pleased to announce that the SNCC Legacy Project has rescheduled the convening from June 3rd through 5th of 2021. I want to thank those of you who have already registered and can encourage others to register when the official notification is issued. The topic of today's webinar is the freedom struggle then and now. The distinguished moderator and panelists were scheduled to discuss this topic at the 60th at 2:30 p.m. this afternoon. We are fortunate to have them here tonight at this virtual meeting. I know you will be well informed by their presentation. Thank you for your participation. Stay safe and sheltered during this pandemic, and we hope to see you in 2021 at the SNCC 60th anniversary convening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Courtland. We appreciate you. We love the SNCC Legacy Project. Thank y'all so much for your work. With that, I have the honor of tossing it over to my friend and colleague, the amazing Hasan Jeffries.
Thank you very much, Ashley, and greetings to everyone I'm Hasan Jeffries, your moderator for this panel. I'm an associate professor of history in the Department of History at The Ohio State University, where I've research and teach on the African-American freedom struggle and have been studying and learning from SNCC activists for the last quarter century since I was an undergrad at Morehouse College. We have an amazing group of panelists assembled virtually today on this anniversary of SNCC's founding. And I'm going to introduce each one in due time because I want us to keep in mind who's talking and why they're sharing what they are sharing. I'm going to ask each a simple question, to begin with, a question about freedom. We've identified this panel as the freedom struggle then and now. We often hear when talking about what it is African Americans have been fighting for, this idea of Black folk fighting for freedom. The language, that term freedom, is really fixed in the lexicon of the Black protest tradition, from freedom schools to freedom parties to slogans, freedom now. But of course, if we're thinking about organizing for freedom, it helps to know what we mean by freedom. It helps to know what the goals have been and what the goals are today. I want to bring into the conversation Brother Charlie Cobb. Brother Charlie Cobb was a field secretary with SNCC. He originated the idea of freedom schools as a part of the 1964 Mississippi Freedom Summer Project. He began a distinguished journalism career starting in 1964 out of Washington, D.C. In 1976, Brother Cobb joined the staff of National Public Radio. And then, of course, Brother Cobb has been writing for a number of years on his experiences as a civil rights organizer. Co-wrote with Bob Moses, Radical Equations, and then most recently, this Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed, How Guns Made the Civil Rights Movement Possible. Brother Cobb, welcome to this conversation. And we will remind you to unmute your microphone for us.
Is it? Oh, I'm sorry.
We got you.
We can hear you, Charlie.
Welcome to the conversation. Nope, you just went back to mute again.
Yeah, Charlie, you might have to hit it one more time.
Can you see it on the bottom?
Yeah, just hit the little microphone. Okay. Just don't hit it anymore. Let me do it for you.
He's like D Nice, cutting in and out.
It's true. Hit it one more time, Charlie, just once.
Okay.
There we go. Don't touch it again. Charlie, don't touch it again.
My hands are off. You know, I'm a guy from the Royal Typewriter days.
And unfortunately, y'all can't see Charlie's beautiful face apparently, but he is here. So enjoy the lyrical voice, the melodic voice of Charlie Cobb. Wonderful.
Brother Charlie, my question for you, given the amazing work that you did in Mississippi with SNCC as a SNCC organizer, could you offer us some insights, briefly, 2 or 3 minutes, as to what freedom meant to you and SNCC organizers working on the ground in places like Mississippi during the height of the 1960s freedom struggle?
Sure. At bottom, the thought driving the organizing was that people had a right to control their lives, to have control over the decision-making that affected their lives. And in a white supremacist society in which we lived in, and I worked in Mississippi, I should say, in the kind of white supremacist society that we lived in, the state was driven by the idea and the politics that meant that white people should control the lives of Black people. So we had to fight for that at several different levels. One level was fighting the state, and another level was fighting for the federal government to pay attention to the needs and struggles of Black people. And we also had to fight for Black people. You know, there had been to think that they could take control of their lives. If you think about it, you know, for 100 years before we even showed up in Mississippi, the whole society had been driven by the idea that you could not, were not capable of thinking that you should control your lives. And we had to fight in part to get Black people to think differently about themselves. And what that meant was you had to dig into Black communities. This was not something that's solved by, say, a protest march. This is not something that's solved by being able to have a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. You had to dig into Black communities, get Black people to be comfortable with you. We had to learn how to do that in the churches, on the streets, on the roads, on the plantations, in the juke joints. And we had to learn how to do that. Now, we were encouraged to do that by Ella Baker, but the learning how to do that was on us. Digging into these communities, getting people to see that they could challenge the system that oppressed them. That's what the organizing was, getting people to see that they could build structures that service them in a way that the structures of the white society did not. That's where the freedom school idea came from. Getting people to see that they could work to gain power. That's where the voter registration idea came from. And we learned that this is not going to happen fast. You know, it was going to be slow, step by step, learning from people, getting people to hear us. How you do that is still relevant to struggle today. It's one of the things I talk to the young activists that I do associate with about a lot. You know, you have to figure out what kind of conversation you can have with the Black community that engages them, that commits them to the idea of struggle. And that's never fast.
The question of how you do that, and we're going to circle back to that toward the in a second. But right now, I want to bring in our other SNCC veteran, Sister Judy Richardson, who spent time on the front lines in the 60s in Cambridge, Maryland, in Mississippi and Alabama. But also, we should not think that SNCC activists, because certainly they're still, and veterans are here with us now, stopped when the high point of the 1960s came to an end. They've been engaged in struggle literally for some 60 years, half a century. And Sister Judy, when you relocated and settled in Washington, D.C. In 1968, helped open Drum and Spear bookstore, becomes the largest Black bookstore in the nation. But then later on in the 80s, working as a series producer for the amazing Eyes on the Prize documentary series and the wonderful work and film that you have done. Let me ask you if you could shed some insights, share some thoughts on the meaning of freedom, but as it relates specifically to sort of media representations of Black folk, how Black folk are or ought to be depicted. How ought we be thinking about freedom when it comes to how we see ourselves, how we define ourselves, how we depict ourselves versus sort of the normative ways in which we have been shown?
That's a great question. Oh my gosh, I could sound like those on-air people? Oh, that's a great question. But anyway, no, it really is, because I think for all of us who came out of SNCC, we carried the values of SNCC through whatever work we did. So for me, there were a number of filmmakers who thought that they were doing it for the art of it, you know, and how do you do new kinds of techniques and stuff. For me, it was how do you organize through film? And when I went into Eyes on the Prize, I knew nothing, zilch zed nada, and I may be going too quickly, zilch zed nada about film. But what I did know is that it was regular people who had created and sustained the movement from, you know, all the stuff that we all know about. And so Eyes on the Prize, not just because of me, but because of Henry Hampton and others, becomes the vehicle through which, for the first time, you see something other than the greatness of Dr. King, who was great, but you didn't see, I mean, when I first found Joanne Robinson, and I say found in quotes, it's because I'm sitting there when it was just gonna be 1 hour and not 14 for Eyes on the Prize. I'm the first paid employee, full-time employee, and everything is just about Dr. King. Even when he goes into Birmingham, you don't see Reverend Shuttlesworth, you only see Dr. King. So, for me and others on the production, it was, okay, how do you get all these people who were plowing the ground before any of us got there from outside? And I see Joanne Robinson in Dr. King's book about the Montgomery bus boycott. And I'm thinking, oh my God, a woman, you know? And so I find her through various ways. And there she is in San Francisco, in LA, as a teacher. And she tells me the story and is so excited because it's the first time anybody's asked her, you know? And so, oh, I need to slow down, honey. Yes, I do. Okay. So I find Joanne Robinson and she tells me this story. And what's amazing about it is that other people also told their regular people stories about being in the leadership before Dr. King gets to a place, before SNCC gets to a place, before CORE gets to a place. And so you see that local grounding within a lot of the communities that we covered in Eyes on the Prize.
Thank you. And you know, one of the things that really leaps to the fore in Eyes on the Prize and the other work that you've done is the importance of politics to the freedom struggle. And I want to bring in Sister Makani Themba on this question. You began organizing as a high school student at UCLA, moving into work with SCLC, working on Jesse Jackson's '84 campaign, and even more recently, the work that you've done around really analyzing and understanding Black organizations, no doubt as they connect to Black political power. The question of politics has always been connected to the Black freedom struggle. I wonder if you could share some thoughts on how you think of Black freedom as it connects to Black political power and politics.
Wow, what a great question. Like, I feel like all these questions have been amazing. And also, I just have to say very quickly how grateful I am to be here among all of you stars. I'm just very grateful to be in the house with the legends, being someone who worked at SCLC in the early 80s, of course. You know, y'all were the celebrities, and you were my celebrities. So I feel very honored. So I definitely want to say thank you for that. You know, it's interesting because when we first started this journey as Black people, thinking about the relationship between electoral politics and Black power, it was a lot more direct, right? It was, you know, I came up during a time when a lot of Black mayors were first being elected. In fact, Gary is still paying, I think, for having the first Black mayor. I think they're still being punished. They're like our Haiti, our personal Haiti, where, you know, you have this very, very much predominantly Black city that is literally been divested from, punished for trying to get off the plantation of having white leadership, you know. And so when it first started, it was kind of clear. It's kind of like how Africa was getting out of colonialism. It was pretty clear. It was like, here was the enemy over here, you know, and then here was us trying to elect our folks. And at first, it felt like, yes, having Black people elected was Black power, right? We had some access. We had, you know, we were able to move some really important things. And in fact, it even had an impact on our health, because there's a famous study that looked at the relationship between having Black mayors and Black council and Black representation actually lowered the infant mortality rate. I mean, that's how directly feeling free was in our bodies, you know, politically, all of those things. Then it got more complicated, right? Then it got more complicated. Then it became a much more colonial construct where you had this thing that happened in Black leadership where literally the Black people who were representing on the political stage had no relationship really with Black people, which was kind of different than how it started. And in fact, what I call penetrator leadership, and I've written a lot about this, but one of the things you saw happen in the late 70s and 80s, that there was an inverse relationship between how deeply penetrated a Black person was in government, in the world, like in terms of their own leadership and their relationship to Black people. But yet those were the Black people who more and more became the ones to speak for Black folks. So you had like a Colin Powell, you know, as a Black leader who had no actual relationship with any Black organizations. And that became a phenomenon. So that's a long way of saying, yes, there was definitely this relationship that was much more tight and sort of correlated early on when movements were engaged in the process of electing our people. And hopefully with some of the work that Movement for Black Lives is doing now, we're trying to recapture that, get more, you know, Black folks who are connected to Black communities elected, and we see that. And I live in Jackson, Mississippi, where I feel like my mayor is an example of a Black person connected to Black people.
Well, I tell you, thank you for that, because the importance of having Black elected officials is critical. But of course, we know that Black faces in high places doesn't necessarily lead to the freedom that we're talking about. But one of the issues that is too often overlooked, and here I want to bring in our host, Ashley Henderson, is the impact of the environment on African Americans and how that relates to our quest for freedom. So Ashley, you've done wonderful work around mountaintop removal down in Appalachia. But when we also think about environmental impact and the stress on Black communities, it includes landfills and the Black Belt and otherwise. So I want to ask you, especially given the work that you've done around the questions of environment and Black folk, about what does freedom for Black folk look like in the sort of contemporary moment when we consider not just their physical freedom, but the space in which we occupy, our communities and our neighborhoods and our general environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I appreciate even about your frame, Hasan, is that everything is impacted by the environment that we're in, right? It's not just like the trees and the birds and the flowers and the four-legged critters who I love to death, but also it's like very much the, like Makani would say, the policies that impact our everyday lives impact our environment, right? So what I think freedom looks like in a 21st century context is whatever the hell Black people say it is, right? Really simple. It's really a simple answer, right? Like self-determination is self-determination is self-determination. I think what matters in regards to thinking about it, like the environment and the like sort of in capital E, capital J environmental justice lens though, is that everything is impacted by climate justice, right? Everything is impacted by environmental justice when we're talking about Black people. When I think about my region, the South, that in no small way I inherited a different South because of the work that SNCC did, because of the work that other folks across multiple different Black organizing traditions have done in the South. The South that I inherited was one where white people said, we don't want stuff in our backyard. We don't want landfills. We don't want pipelines and fracking. We don't want coal ash. We don't want mountaintop removal or any kind of coal mining, right? Unless it gives us money. We'll take it if it gives us money. We'll buy it. We'll be absentee landowners and we'll just like do this rotating urban development. And then we'll decide, well, we want to be in the cities and we'll push all the Black people into the counties. And then we'll get tired of being in the county. So we'll rotate them back into the inner city. And then we'll say the inner city is a bad place to live, right? Who gets to define what healthy environment is, right? I think is a question for our organizing in this time. And I think the last thing that I would say, particularly about environment, right, is that if we're thinking about the Black liberation movement of the United States. You can't think about that without thinking about the Southern Freedom Movement, which was in no small way led by the Black liberation movement of the South. That the highest concentration of Black people in the 21st century is in the US is in the South, right? It's the largest geographic region in the country. Only 4% of philanthropic dollars are coming to that region, right? So all the money that goes to charitable acts, right, and organized philanthropy, only 4% of that money comes to the South. So if only 4% of that money comes to the South, you can imagine how much of that is going to grassroots Black organizing in this time. And even then, you can imagine how much of that money is going to Black grassroots organizing in this time that is specifically led by revolutionaries and radical thinkers that are thinking about what the positive, healthy, self-determined environment of Black people should be, right? And so we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to not create false dichotomies in our work, not to silo away from each other because of what usually white supremacists and the state and folks that are consolidating their wealth and power and philanthropy say our relationship should look like. And we have the opportunity to say, you know what, when we're thinking about all the problems in this country and how they disproportionately impact Black people, we also should be pointing the camera at folks like the Movement for Black Lives, folks like the Rising Majority, folks like organizations that are Black-led in this country and in the South that are also coming up with some of the most innovative work I've seen in my lifetime. And I think it's important for the sake of this 60th anniversary of noting that, like, we're not doing it alone, right? That it's also a false dichotomy to say that there's just like this invisible tension between young people and elders. No, there's political difference. We can talk about that. We can be in principled struggle. But what's real is that, some of the very people on this call, folks like Charlie Cobb, folks like Judy Richardson, taught me that intergenerational is possible when I was just an angry teenager that thought old people that thought they knew everything, right? It was these folks that actually taught me that, like, intergenerational organizing is worth trying, and that we're all better for it because, again, we're all teachers and we're all learners, right? That's what popular education is, and that's what Highlander is continuing to try to show people how to do. So when I think about what it means to be building a healthy environment, I think it means centering the issues that are impacting Black people, and that's all the issues. That's every single one, whether it's talking about reproductive justice or environmental justice or education justice. I know we got some Alliance Education Justice folks on the call. Any of these front lines of struggle, all of them are connected because they're all impacting our communities, because they're all defined by our environment. And I think that we have the power and the knowledge and the ability to be able to make a better world.
And I think we really see as a result of this Corona crisis, it's really putting in stark relief for those who were under the misguided belief that our environments were equal or there wouldn't be this disproportionate impact. But you see the way in which African American communities especially are being devastated by the impact of disparate health care availability. It speaks directly to this question of environment and environmental justice, because a part of that is access to healthcare, being able to grow up in safe environments, not suffering from asthma and the like. I want to bring in Brother Josh Myers, who has been waiting patiently. Josh is assistant professor of Africana Studies at Howard University, the Mecca, and the recent author of We Are Worth Fighting For, a history of the Howard University student protest of 1989, hot off the presses from NYU. Brother Josh is also an expert in research and teaching sort of some African-American intellectual histories, African-American intellectual traditions. And so my question for you around this idea or notion of freedom is, what are some of the continuities that you see in the struggle for freedom, both in terms of defining what it is, but then also to change gears a little bit? This is a two-parter, both in how we ought to be trying to achieve it over the Black experience. So in the past, from the past to the present, what are some of these continuities and what Black folk have been fighting for, and how has it changed perhaps? But then also to pivot away from that, after you answer that one, what are some of the ways in which Black folk have been engaged in this organizing tradition from the past to the present?
Thank you, Hasan. And I just want to reiterate my gratitude for being in this space with so many people who made some of the life conditions that we all experience as Black people possible. For the last year, I have been working with the SNCC Legacy Project, really thinking about this question of continuity. How do we think about legacy in terms of the future? What does the future mean when we think about our legacy? And I also want to, think about the long, genealogy and history of this. We celebrate every April 16th in Washington, D.C., we celebrate Emancipation Day. And so that, community was the first to really win legal emancipation. But we have been freeing ourselves before that. And I think, DC became a place where that legal emancipation was possible because of Africans freeing themselves on their own terms, as Ashley said, on our own self-determining, terms. And I also think about, many other people who fought in the generation that we're celebrating today who are still in prison. Jamil Al-Amin, thinking about what he might think about what freedom would look like in this particular moment. And so for me, freedom is the practice of making new worlds. The possibilities of doing so require a knowing and an awareness of those practices as they were then, wherever we say then is, with those that are ongoing now. It is only through a sense of that then as a living presence in the now that we might understand deeply what animates this idea of freedom and what futures will be possible. When I think of Black freedom, I think of how we live and how we might live if we could. To my mind, the struggle to achieve Black freedom has been about living without constraint in community and in love. It is about inhabiting a world where there is no hierarchy, no impositions, a world where we are guided by our own mutual pursuit of the human goal of reproducing ourselves, maintaining connections with the worlds we've always produced, and ensuring connections with the life force that makes those worlds. Because what has produced unfreedom is the inability to practice these forms of world making. That unfreedom has many names. We call it the ma'afa, we might call it modernity, we might call it racial capitalism, we might call it white supremacy, we might call it heteropatriarchy, and so on. But at their core, these practices of unfreedom are generated from logics that are simply put about who gets to be. Who gets to be human, who gets to be whole, who gets to be alive. And so freedom for the many is about living and extending life, rethinking the meaning of life, thinking of life as possibilities beyond stricture and structure, beyond the blueprints we've been given as normal, because we've never accepted them. There are other worlds, other possibilities, and to me, SNCC is a reminder of that. How do you go into a place where nothing was supposed to, quote unquote, exist? Black people weren't supposed to have a politics. Black people weren't supposed to have a way of being, of resisting and being free and living differently than the accepted norms. But you have to imagine that differently if you're going to go into those communities and do what Charlie Cobb and others said they did and actually did in SNCC, right? And so the thing about continuity is what makes that decision possible, what makes that context realizable, right? And for me, if we can answer that question, we can think about what we should be practicing now. If we can answer the question of what gives someone not only the courage and responsibility and duty, but also the radical imagination to transform Mississippi, but to also take the transformation of Mississippi and connect it to questions of anti-colonialism, and connecting to questions of destroying apartheid, to connect it to questions that are much larger than this domestic American nation state. We can also think about what might animate us to go forward. And so freedom now means making the worlds that we want possible, but it also is about thinking about this idea of recreating life as we know it. And to me, that connects with everything that has been said earlier, because life as we know it in this world has to end, and we have to make a new world so that we can all live.
The question of, and I want to stay with you, Josh, just for a second, and then we'll bring the others back into the conversation as well. The question of radical imaginations and the need to tap into that, as you mentioned, as Charlie and Judy had, thinking creatively on the ground, Courtland Cox had thinking creatively on the ground, and the importance for that as a tool for creating freedom, for being able to realize this desire to live free and unfettered. Could you give us just one sort of tool or tip, one thing that we could do to help develop or foster radical imaginations in the minds of all people, but especially, I think, young people today?
I think about this a lot, and you know, I engage young people every week, and for me, we have so much imagination in terms of what we already do. It's embedded in the practices of living that we already do and that we already practice. And I think about what it, like what I said earlier, you know, what it would be like, you know, to live if we could, right? If people just left us alone, what we could be, right? And so how do you then sort of build space, build the capacity to live like that, like in the wake of or in spite of, you know, the things that are doing us very real harm? And, you know, it's hard for me to give a tool or a tip, but the best thing that I could do is to ask people to just listen to what's already happening, to find the practices of freedom that are embedded in the everyday living of Black folks, connect to those practices, and then enlarge them so that we can all have access and all build capacity and community with those things, because that's the only way this thing is going to shift for us, is to find what is already working, to find what people are already doing, and to remember that we weren't really supposed to make it. Like we are here, but we really weren't supposed to be here in many ways. And so why are we here? What happened? What did we do? How did we constitute ourselves differently against this world? And then from there, connect that and build it. And I think that then would translate into the kind of day-to-day organizing practices that we would need to do. How do we engage, you know, the questions of politics? How do we engage the questions of the state? How do we engage questions of the environment? How do we engage questions of taking care of each other through food security, through healthcare? Once we know that we already have the capacity, because we have that radical imagination, because we are actually here, then the question is building a larger space for it, building a bigger tent for those people to come in. And I think we can't forget, I guess one of my real messages, we can't forget that we have brothers and sisters around the world that are doing this every day along with us. And we have to make sure that we remain connected to people beyond the United States who are in many ways facing the same conditions that we are, and looking for us and looking to us to make those connections.
I think we absolutely have to constantly keep in mind that we are a part of a larger community. Not only our sort of local communities, our state, our regional communities, but part of the African diaspora. And certainly Charlie Cobb understands that, having spent so much time working to record and present news and information about the African diaspora, about the continent. I want to invite Charlie and Judy, both of you, back into this conversation. This idea of radical imagination, it seems to me, in terms of one of the elements needed to get free, it seems to me as well, one of the ways that we might be able to create or spark or support radical imagination, radical thinking about how to create freedom, is by tapping into intergenerational informational wealth. What is learned from organizing, what is inherited from past organizers, used in the present, but then also passed on to those who are coming in an activist spirit going forward. I wonder, what are some of the, if either one of you can jump in, perhaps Judy first, then Charlie, what are some of the ways that you think are effective for transferring or sharing what you learned on the front lines, what you are continuing to learn on the front lines now, to those who are just stepping into their activist selves and those who will be coming after you today when it comes to this long struggle, constant struggle for securing freedom? Judy, would you like to begin?
Yeah, I was thinking about how, because a lot of it really is about personal transformation. I mean, yeah, it's about groups and it's about seeing change. But and I'll just speak personally, what was amazing for me is to come into this group of really brilliant Black folks, white folks, but primarily it was a Black-run organization, in terms of SNCC, and seeing people changing the world as I knew it. And that was an amazing thing to me, coming from, a little Tarrytown, New York, and thinking that nothing would ever change, and didn't even know there were things that had to be changed. But it was done through the work. So I don't remember talking a lot about political philosophy. I don't remember even talking about, whatever. I mean, you knew there was socialism, communism, you knew what was going on, you knew there were Nicaraguan struggles, or you knew what was going on in Southeast Asia. I knew all of those struggles. But what I most understood was that it was being done through the work. So everything, the relationships that we had with each other, it was who worked well, who did the work. We couldn't afford, for example, to get into a lot of the fratricidal struggles. I mean, it didn't mean that we didn't disagree with one another. It didn't mean that we didn't get mad at one another. But it did mean that if you keep getting shot at, and if your main thing is, how do you get Black people registered to vote without getting them killed? Then a lot of the silly stuff, like somebody going out with your boyfriend or your girl, all that stuff gets pushed to the side, because the bottom line is they are trying to kill you and the people who are feeding and clothing and guiding you. And so I guess for me, I'm trying to figure out how you translate that into the current struggle in a way that says it is through the work. The talking is fine, but it's through the work.
Charlie, let me ask you, what aspects of the work that seem to work, if you will, successfully then, perhaps the Freedom School model, would you bring forward, would you like to see used and utilized in the current moment?
Understanding Ella Baker is key. She was the one that pointed us as very young people, activists, toward grassroots work in the communities and working with the poorest of the poor, working with the people at the bottom, learning how to enter into communities in which violence, great violence, one of the most ignored aspects of the movement, great violence hovered over Black people seeking something better. And the lesson for today is that there's still a great need to sink roots into Black communities, the most ignored parts of the Black community. After all, what made SNCC radical, and people forget this, what made SNCC radical was the people it worked with. And who were the people it worked with? The people at the bottom. Well, there's still a great need for that. And it always involves learning. I can tell you, for instance, anything you want to know about organizing in Sunflower County, Mississippi, or Issaquah County, Mississippi, or Tallahatchie County, Mississippi. I'm not so good if you ask me about the west side of Chicago or South Central LA, because there's a learning process if you want to, and that's what Ms. Baker taught us right from the very start at SNCC's founding conference, which took place 60 years ago today. And there's still a need, and that's what I try and do in my interactions with young people, is to push forward the idea of learning how to enter into communities and engage communities at the grassroots with the idea of making change, and getting people to believe that they can make change, because my experience is that people can make change.
I want to bring, on that note, I want to bring Sister Makani back into the conversation. And I want to stay with, because of the wonderful work that you've done specifically around politics and political organizing, and that is so central to the Black Freedom Project, if you will. What can we apply, or how can we apply, rather? That's the question. How can we apply some of these lessons that Charlie pointed out that were learned from Ella Baker? Start where the people are, sink roots. It's the people that made SNCC radical, not so much the ideas. This is a learning process. How can we take some of those really core, pivotal organizing concepts and apply them to the Black politics today, so that we're able to move forward as a community in a stronger way?
That is a great question. And well, one, I have to shout out the chat. The chat has just been lit. So all of y'all in the chat who are offering such awesome insights and history and information, I just love y'all. It's amazing. Every one of y'all, we could have had a panel of 651 people, like we actually could have. So I want to do that. And I've been trying to interact with the chat and the questions as much as possible, because you know, this is what we're here to do, have a conversation. So I want to say that. And then and the other thing I was thinking about, so this is probably backwards, but it's working out. This is like one of my favorite children's books. Mm-hmm. And it's out of print, even though I think people are doing print on demand. And this is actually a book that came out in, I think, 1970, mm-hmm. about the first Black free space, right? And it's a fictional book on some level, even though there were several, and I've written some about this, several spaces where Black people got together and made, I mean, this is been happening since the 1700s. Black people have been creating these communities where we have been free. Like, you know, so this is not a new, you don't have to step into a new radical imagination. We have to step into a new thing. We have a history of freedom. We have a history of dreaming. And as someone who has another title with the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture as the Minister of Revolutionary Imagination, I felt like it was my duty as someone who holds that title to go ahead and say that in the context of this work, because we are always creating. And I think that there isn't any of us who wouldn't say that we are building on that. So yes, of course, culture, helping people dream, working together, so much music, right, that's come out of this tradition that was built on gospel. I'm a preacher's kid, I'm a preacher's grandkid. So it's like, I know about that church, right? But you know, there's some things in it that we need to leave behind, just saying, and some things that we carried into it in revolutionary ways, right? Like the way the music was transformed, the way we had people singing along in a movement that I think is part of the SNCC tradition. And even though we're not in a period now where we're going to have to rethink so much about how we organize in this context of social distancing, right? And even before that, you know, so much of our organizing was predicated on somebody caring when a bunch of us showed up. That is not the president that is in office right now. You know, he gives no blanks, right, about what it is. So we're in a place where we have to do a lot of rethinking, not throwing out the baby, but maybe the dirty bathwater, like, and I also think that we also have to recognize the difference between freedom and liberation. Freedom is important. We need freedom. We need to feel free. And it's super important, right, for us to talk about it, to think about it, because that is the first step toward liberation. But liberation is more about like the state structures, the spaces that we hold and curate and build together, right? And freedom is in many ways about how you feel, and you almost, it's individual. We can be free together too, right? But a lot of how we gauge what's freedom is about our agency, right? Where liberation, sometimes you give up a little agency to be in collective activity with other people to build governance, right? Like we give up a little something. And so we're also the other practice that I think is important to recognize, that I feel like is a part of the SNCC legacy in my mind, is a practice of liberation, which is a little different from freedom. There's things people made a decision in a division of labor to say, you know what, this is not the thing I really like to do, but I'm gonna do it because collectively I see my role. And that to me is liberation work. And part of this, sometimes we're in a movement now where people are like really into freedom, but not into liberation. They don't want to do stuff that's hard. You know, they're real fragile in meetings, folk crying. There's just a lot going on. And so I feel, I mean, if I can just be real for a minute. And so I feel like part of this thing around like finding that bridge with freedom and liberation, thinking about what it means to organize, to talk to people you don't know, which I think is the other legacy of SNCC, getting out of your comfort zone. Maybe you weren't a church person, but you went to church to talk to some Black people. You know, maybe you weren't somebody who was that comfortable with the brothers who drank out the paper bag on the corner, but you went and talked to them because you knew that you needed to do that to connect with some Black people. And we have folks who are struggling, and it's not just a generational thing. I want to be clear. You know, I'm going to turn 60 this year. There are people my age and older struggling with the same question, right? Where they don't want to talk to people they don't know, where they don't want to engage and push themselves out of the comfort zone because they're more concerned with freedom than they are with liberation. So I'm grateful to these traditions and the history, because one, they show us that things work, and I'm also grateful to be a student of history. And I know that's usually things that's left more to my brother. He's the historian in the family, but I still read, you know, and care about those things. And as Black folk, we have been putting our brain and our hearts and our energy into being free in so many ways. That's, you know, and so I feel like the SNCC tradition, you know, Blackdom in Arizona, my favorite name of a Black liberation place, Blackdom. I just want t-shirts, right? And the fact that Black people went to Arizona and created their own little, Arizona. Not Arizona, New Mexico. No, yeah, New Mexico. So anyway, I feel like, yes, grateful for those traditions. We need to examine a lot about what we're doing now, how we're engaging with regular folks. And I know everybody want to go to the strip club, and that's cool too. I know there's a lot of organizers going to strip club. Y'all do that. That's cool. That's all beautiful. And we also have to talk to the folks that maybe we're not that comfortable with, like our own parents, you know, our own aunties. That have no idea we're organizers, and they don't even know what we do. They can't even, you know, that's his challenge.
You know, for those who are audio only, you couldn't see Ashley snapping and praising and bobbing her head and weaving. And I don't know how you interpret that, but that's what was going on. Ashley, would you like to say a word or two on how we engage in this dialogue, engage in this communication? So we're not just talking about an individual freedom, we're talking about a collective freedom. We're not just talking about changing a few things on the periphery, we're talking about liberation, which requires radical restructuring of the society in which we live. Could you share some, perhaps it's even some of the work that you're doing at Highlander that helps us move collectively in that direction?
Yeah, sorry, I got to get myself together because Makani just preached a whole ass word on the Oh, my phone is blowing up. People like, I had to quit multitasking because Makani and Judy just put it down. Yeah, that was some truth. So I need us to resonate on the brilliance that just was. and not just because it felt good and it like had some zingers in it, but because it literally is strategically and tactically exactly the shit that we need to be talking about right now if we're going to survive. Like, quite frankly, it's not even about getting to liberation. It's about like literally coming up with the strategies that just keep our people alive right now. Right? So it wasn't just like a sermon to get you to hoop and holler. It was actually like, if you embed this in your practice, you might fuck around and win. Right? So yeah, just needed to get that out. Also to say that, you know, I think what's so brilliant about SNCC and about many of the Black organizing traditions that center the tactic of like getting out in the community, it wasn't that they went to the community to explain to the community how they should be doing better, right? Which is something that I see a lot, right? It's like, if I could just tell Black people about why Medicare for All would save their lives, then they would go to the polls. And if I could just explain to them like what beloved community would feel like, then they would, you know, they would go and do this thing that I want them to do that actually does not make sense if they can't even put like food on the table, right? SNCC actually, like, the thing that I hear from my elders is that Ms. Baker told people to go sit down and shut up and to deeply listen, right? So what would it look like, you know, if we actually went to hear what's keeping people up at night? You know, not to say that that's the only thing we have to organize around, right? Like, not to say that we'll agree about the political ideologies that led to them coming to those conclusions, but to say how much more would be possible if we even knew what the hell Black people, regular ass Black people wanted. What would become possible if we just knew, right? If we just knew and didn't think that, even if we don't mean to, that by consequence, like what we're saying with our actions is that we think we know better than regular Black people what's best for them. Because that's what we're saying, right? If we don't just go sit down, shut up, go to the places they are that make me feel uncomfortable, whether it's going back to church or kicking it, you know, at the sit-go on the corner where they be asking me to buy them beer and stuff, right? Like, if I can't do that comfortably, then I cannot call myself an organizer, period. And I definitely can't call myself a leader by self-appointment if grassroots communities can't, if you come to Chattanooga and they can't tell you who I am, right? Anyway, that's a sermon for another night. To your question though, comrade, you know, I think that when I'm thinking about the how, I think the answer is really simple. It's imperfectly. That's how we're gonna come together across all of our generational and the multitude of other differences that we've got, and be in principled struggle with each other to try to figure out how we save the world together. You know, Vincent Harding used to say, and he wrote, like, some of y'all know me know this story because it's such an important one in my life and in my organizing. When the last time that he was at Highlander with many of the SNCC vets and Grace Lee Boggs and many other folks for our 80th homecoming celebration. And he was staying at the Horton House, which is the house that I actually get to stay at when I'm on the Hill. And there's a guest book of that has signatures and like letters and notes and pictures from all sorts of people that have come and been at Highlander. And on the 80th anniversary of Highlander, he wrote a letter to us that ultimately would be the last letter that he wrote to us. And it said a whole lot of stuff in it, like that the work we were doing was great, that we should go right on, which is a very 1960s thing to say. And then at the very end, he said, a new America still needs to be born. Let us be the midwives, right? And when I think about birth, I haven't birthed the baby out of my own body. But when I think about the times that I've been in the room, it is messy. It's messy, it's painful. Right? It's not just like the beauty of this new thing getting created. It like takes some labor to do it. It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for the person that's birthing the kid. It's uncomfortable for the people that are watching, feeling totally useless and like not helpful. Right? It's an uncomfortable process, but at the end of it, there's this whole new thing that we all get to celebrate and dote over, right? And the best and most ideal of circumstances. And I think that's what building movement is, right? Judy already said that, like, you build accountability and trust through the work. You build relationship through the work, and I couldn't agree more. But I don't think that work is just going to be easy. I think if it was that easy, we would have already won, right? So I think when I think about what does it look like to come together across our differences to be able to build relationship, I think what it means is like a level of vulnerability, right? Coming knowing that I don't know everything, right? And that I know some stuff really, really well. And that I have that to offer. I have that experience and that study to offer, and that I also have the ability to learn and get sharper, and that I'm better for it to be in spaces with people that I disagree with. I am better for it to be in principled struggle with elders. I'm better for it, even more importantly, than just thinking about intergenerational organizing between people in their 30s and people in their 60s and 70s. I'm talking about being in principled struggle with my 7-year-old niece who has a more radical politic than I do, right? So what does it look like for us to just be perfectly imperfect, but accountable to each other in our practice, accountable to each other in our study, and accountable to each other in developing the strategies and the tactical interventions that will get our people not only through this current crisis, these current crises, but to that place of building beloved community so that we can just get to practice in it a little bit more. I don't think there's a silver bullet. I think time, place, and conditions really matter, but I do think that there are characteristics in ourselves that we can really be paying attention to think about ourselves as lifelong learners together.
You know, I'm struck by thinking about the occasion that brought us together here this evening, the 60th anniversary of SNCC's founding, that SNCC was composed of individuals, a band of brothers and sisters, but it was an organization that developed a unique organizational culture that was so essential to the work that SNCC was doing, the grassroots organizing, taking ordinary people seriously as political thinkers. Judy Richardson, could you offer in a word or two, an insight or two on the importance of developing that culture within SNCC and what it was, its significance or importance, relevance to the success of the work? So beyond just, well, we were individuals and we were committed, but something was the glue that held the individuals together. There's something about the organization that made the individuals even better collectively than they were individually. So could you just offer a word or two on sort of internally what that dynamic was inside SNCC? Because it may be a lesson that we need to hear as we organize today in different organizations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me give a couple of points, and then Courtland may want to, and Charlie may want to come in on this too. But for me, the songs were important. Now, I don't come out of the church, okay? But a lot of the folks who surrounded us did. And I will tell you that if you came out of jail and you came into a church and they were singing, "Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around," you felt like you were impenetrable. You know, Dr. Bernice Johnson Reagan talks about how you can't have a movement without music. And I'm not talking chanting now, I'm talking music. And so when we would come into, you know, out of even if you were on a demonstration and somebody was about to do something to you, you know, you felt like you could join in song and they could not touch you. Now, you knew intellectually that would happen, but in your somehow, like I remember John Lewis was about to get, you know, they were manhandling him and they were taking us all to jail. And so I see them and I try and get out of the cops' hands who have me. And actually in the process, I also kicked a cop in a very sensitive part, but that's a whole other question. Okay, got in the Times, Foreman wanted to know, did I do it deliberately? You know, it's a whole other thing. But the main thing that got me through was I'm singing at these cops, like it's gonna make a difference. Well, it did to me. All of the folks that we know, Foreman would have us when we would start arguing in a staff meeting. And when I say arguing, what was important about that is that I don't remember anybody ever doing personal stuff in a meeting. So you would argue political. You would argue, is it time to go into the black belt? You would argue, these are the strategies we need to do this and this and this. But you never brought your personal stuff because that was for outside the meeting. Because again, they're trying to kill you. You don't have time for the personal stuff in this meeting. But what would happen is you would have the arguments. And then I remember when I thought, you know, we had forgotten how to come together again. This was after 64. It was before the Selma March. And suddenly in the middle of this really contentious meeting, Foreman starts singing, "Will the Circle Be Unbroken?" And what it did is it brought us together and reminded us who we were one to the other, what we had been through together. And again, that goes back to the work, what we had been with each other. And, and I thought he's gonna sing, and he didn't sing that well, but I thought he's gonna sing and nobody's gonna join with him. Everybody joined with him in song. So it was that, and it was also the sense that I never felt personally vulnerable. And there was something about the way people worked. First of all, when I first find Foreman, it's because I'm being brought by Reggie Robinson from Baltimore. I think I'm going back to Cambridge, Maryland. He says, let's stop by the national office. And I see this guy standing at the top of the stairs through this plate glass window, and he has overalls on and he's sweeping the stairs. And I see Reggie go up to him and hug him, and I hear the guy with the overall saying, "Hey, Captain, how you doing?" So I'm thinking, oh, how egalitarian. Reggie is hugging the janitor, right? No, it was Jim Foreman, the executive secretary. Now, what Foreman, I found out, was doing was, first of all, he was saying no job is too small for anybody in the organization to do, and every job is really important. So when you did, because this is before high mechanization and stuff, so you'd have to do all of these leaflets and mailings and stuff. We would always sing during the mailings, and everybody did the mailings. Julian Bond was on the mailing. John Lewis was on. Everybody did the mailings. So everybody felt valued, and it was non-hierarchical. And again, I would go back to, I never felt personally that anybody was going to personally attack me. They might attack a position, but they would not attack me personally.
Thank you. Courtland, Courtland Cox, I want to bring you in into this conversation as well. Could you add to what Sister Judy just offered about that internal cultural dynamic or operational culture of SNCC, and what are some of the key takeaways that we can latch on to today?
I think one of the things, SNCC was always both at the same time an organization and a movement. So as Judy mentioned, the work and the things that were necessary to do the work really was about the movement. The organization was kind of layered on top of it. We had to bring in money. We had to do a number of things. I think what is amazing to me is this is 60 years, and we have an organization, the SNCC Legacy Project, that SNCC people who were part of that movement are still participating in and volunteering and doing all the work. And as Judy said, that that it's non-hierarchical and everybody has to do the work. So while the organization ended in 1970, the movement continued over 60 years. And to me, that is the amazing thing, because what we were really about was the work, as people have been talking about.
Let me jump in real quick, Hasan, because I see people there's a multitude of chats happening. There's like a couple hundred people on Facebook and our like 600 some odd people in the chat. Just want to be clear that when they talk about non-hierarchical, that doesn't mean there wasn't structure. Structure and hierarchy are not synonyms. They don't mean the same thing. So before you get real excited about like, oh word, we don't need an organization. We just like do whatever. Everybody's got the same decision-making power, blah, blah, blah. That's not what they said.
No, that's not, no. Everybody had to do the work, and all the work was necessary, and everybody was expected to fulfill the role. Number of people had different roles. I was once the program director of the organization. Jim was Judy talked about was the executive director. John or Stokely or Jamil Alameen were there. We had structure, but when it came to the work, everybody had to engage, whatever their position was in the organization.
Can I inject something in here?
Yes, please.
At SNCC headquarters, unlike any single any other civil rights organization. Let me put it that way. And I'm speaking as a person who never worked in the headquarters, who was always in the field in Mississippi. The SNCC headquarters, unlike any other civil rights organization I can think of, existed almost solely to serve the people in the field.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is very, very important. The fact is, we weren't all that interested in some of the stuff Foreman and others want to do, like go on these fundraising tours, you know, change out of our jeans into khakis and a shirt and a tie to appeal to rich people on the west side of New York or something like that. But the organization, and I think this is a unique aspect about SNCC, always the central headquarters existed, not to tell us what to do, but to be told by the people in the field what to do, and to provide the services necessary for the people in the field working in the communities to get done what they thought needed to get done. This is a unique aspect of SNCC. I've given time and other things. I will spare you stories I've heard from participants in other organizations about what national headquarters represented.
Thank you, Charlie. I'm keeping an eye on the clock, and I want to be mindful of the time. This is a SNCC anniversary panel, not a SNCC meeting. So we're going to end at a certain point.
Who made that decision?
Hierarchy, structure.
It was probably the younger folks.
So I want to begin sort of winding down a little bit by Ashley inviting you maybe to start us off, our host here, could you just leave us, you know, these were trying times before this Corona crisis. They are especially trying times now. The issues haven't changed in many ways in this struggle for freedom. In many ways, they've just become, for some, more exacerbated. Access to healthcare, food security, and the like. Keeping that in mind, but also knowing that this too shall pass, and we will still be in the same place, if not in the worse place than we were before it. Could you offer, and I want everyone to sort of think about this because I want to reach everyone individually in a second. Could you just share maybe one thing that you would like to see us do, either individually, collectively, in our various organizations that are politically oriented or socially oriented in this moment, to help us move forward towards that goal of freedom and liberation? Just one thing that you would like us individually or collectively to do in this moment moving forward.
One thing, Jesus. Yeah, I mean, I think if I had to sum it up in one thing, I would say to get serious about knowing what gift you have to contribute to movement, study it, become excellent at it, and do it in community with other folks that are trying to build organizations and social movements to make the world a better place. I think that we all too often are really willy-nilly about just like trying to figure it out and thinking we have a lifetime to figure it out. And that's true. Like I said, we're lifelong learners, but the dialectic of it is people are dying right now. And our people deserve our excellence. And so I think, you know, the first step is like studying to show ourselves approved, shutting up and sitting down and listening to grassroots communities about what they need, getting the training that we need to be excellent at the roles that we play, and getting to work, joining somebody's organization. There's plenty of us out here that are doing that work. If you don't know where to start, like, feel free to holler at me or any number of the really incredible organizers in the chat. But I think we got to get to work, and we got to take this moment seriously, get uncomfortable, and take some risks like never before, for the sake of like saving the lives of millions of Black people. So I'm a commitment to that, and I hope that you join.
Wonderful, thank you. Sister Makani, same question. One thing that you would like, would recommend, like to see folk doing individually, collectively, in this. It doesn't have to be the one thing to solve all the problems. Just one thing, large or small, in this moment.
No, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you Thank you for this. This could have been all kinds of things, Hasan, and I just really appreciate the way you've held it down. Thank you. Got to give love. You know, I think one thing is for folks to not be afraid to show up where you are. Because there's probably something that you're thinking already. You were talking to your friend at the hairdresser and you're like, girl, I need to do this, or whatever that is. And so I want to encourage people to trust your heart, to show up and do the thing that has been on your heart, as people say. Because all of us, pretty much, that's kind of how we started in this game. That there was something in us that felt like we could actually make a difference. We had an idea, somebody had an idea, and that idea appealed to us. So I feel like if all of us were to trust that better heart, that place where we're imagining how we might be helpful, but we think, maybe not me, maybe I'm not ready, you know, maybe I don't know enough. You know enough. You got this. And if anybody says to you they have an idea and you're an organizer, you know, you might want to make room for them, right? And I guess the very last thing, the short thing is, no matter how dark it gets, we have to continue to imagine ourselves on the other side of this, free and ready, because that's what got our people out of chains. If they would have kept thinking it was always going to be like this, we'd still be picking cotton. So those two things, continue to hold the imagination that we can rise from this. And whatever is on your heart to do, there's a reason why. I want you to trust yourself and just do it.
Just do it. We already know what to do. It's just a matter of figuring out a way to do it, a path forward. I want to bring Brother Dr. Josh Myers in, and could you offer us a closing thought, a closing word on this question of one thing that you would recommend or like to see people doing in this moment to help us move forward?
Yeah, it's been very difficult when we consider the scale of loss. And in terms of, you know, the movement community, we had been experiencing a difficult season of loss even before this. If we think about, you know, how many our movement veterans and our elders have been leaving. And I go back to something I said to Dory Ladner as this was all unfolding, because I wanted to see how she was feeling, how she was thinking, watching her comrades, watching, you know, her people, you know, depart the earth. And the thing that she told me is, her response to me is something that I want to extend to everybody on this call. And the thing that she said was, you know, Josh, take comfort, because everybody who has recently passed, they lived a life that was full of joy. And so if the people who did the work that we are celebrating, thinking through, trying to extend, could still find joy, could still find comfort, then that's a lesson for us. Where do we find comfort? Where do we find joy? And then finally, I would leave us with, find a way to practice love, to love the most vulnerable people around you. And I think that would elevate us all.
Wonderful, thank you. Brother Charlie Cobb.
Well, if you ask me what I would like to see, what I think is necessary, I still think, and some of the people I talk to on a regular basis will be familiar with this, is we still have to figure out in today's more complex Black community how to dig into those communities at the grassroots, how to convey the notion that change is possible, that it's possible to envision a better and that's actually harder to do today than it was back in our day in the 1960s. The critical question to me is still, how do you find the language that works in Black communities at the grassroots, that engages people, commits people to struggle? I'm done.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about some numbers. Black people are 14% of the American population, and they're going to suffer, when it's all said and done, 40% of the deaths that occurred. And much of that is because they lack resources in terms of food, shelter, clothing, health care, and so forth. On the other side, $6 to $8 trillion will be spent by the Federal Reserve and the Congress in order to deal with what they think is the pandemic. And probably more than $8 trillion. And that was organized in less than 30 days. I would like to see all the organizations that exist, whatever they are, on the Black community, begin knowing and understanding the kind of destruction that's been taking because of disparities in wealth and disparities in the questions of food, shelter, and clothing. How do we now begin to fight and to begin to wage the war to get the resources to come into our communities? There's $6 to $8 trillion being spent right now in terms of resources. How do we now go about beginning to protect our community in this discussion?
Beginning to protect our community. Sister Judy Richardson, the final word.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure. I know there are a couple of things. One is, and it's not the be all and end all, but I know that we got to get this horrible person out of the White House and everybody who came in with him, because he will destroy us. And he's just gonna, because he's a sociopath. So it's not even about politics for him altogether. It is, he's a crazy person. And so I see, for me, who, for the first few years, I was, maybe I voted, maybe I didn't. There are points now where this man he's got to get out of here, because I know that I have a luxury. I have Medicare and I have Social Security. So no matter what happens, I'm gonna have a roof over my head. I may not be able to eat, but I will have a roof over my head, all right? I am in a privileged position in that way. So for those who think, well, the Biden is not, he's horrible. We all know he's horrible. I don't give a shit. I don't care. We have got to get this man out of here. And I understand all the stuff we got to do with it. It's the organizing. It's making people accountable. It's up and down ballot. It's all the stuff that we know about. But I also know that that's important. So, okay, say that's number one. Number two is, it's hard, particularly I'm up in here by myself working, and thinking, damn, it's another day in COVID, It's real easy to get, down, And what I keep thinking about is, I remember with Eyes on the Prize, interviewing E.D. Nixon, who's the one who taps Dr. King to be the leader of the boycott, okay? And there are a lot of reasons around that. We won't go into it, but that's what happens. And at one point he says, well, most of the time I was doing this for the children and the grandchildren and those who came behind me. And then at a certain point I thought, shoot, I want to enjoy some of this stuff myself. But most of the people who guarded us and guided us and did all, who laid the foundation for us, what they kept saying is, we may never see the change we've been working so hard for. We may never see it. But if we do nothing, nothing changes for the better, So I guess I keep trying to remind myself and surround myself with people like all the people in SNCC Legacy, the people who are sitting on this panel. They are the ones who energize me. I mean, Courtland is a whip man. I mean, it's like, have you sent out that memo? Have you done this? But part of it is that we trust each other. Even after, dare I say it, we're in our 70s and 80s now. Who would believe this? And yet we are still together, we are still working, and we're not sitting around, knitting baby booties. We are still at the job of making justice. And that's what's amazing, because we surround ourselves with each other. And we are still a band of brothers and sisters in a circle of trust. Yeah.
There are, the task is daunting. And we've been engaged, we collectively, as Black folk, have been engaged in this struggle for literally for centuries, 400 plus years. And so sometimes it can be paralyzing, knowing the difficult challenges and obstacles that are before us, and especially so in a sort of crisis moment that we are in. But thank you all for sharing these small kernels of knowledge and wisdom that can help us in this moment advance the struggle forward. Loving the most vulnerable. We can see all you have to do is turn on television, the news, and you'll see these long lines at food banks across the country. Love the vulnerable. We can help out there. Change is possible. We can't be paralyzed by the troubled times in which we live, and how debilitating not only not seeing change, but seeing things get worse. We have to believe that if our ancestors could survive and endure the horror of the Ma'afa, the Middle Passage, then we can get through the troubled times that we have before us today. Start where you are. You have the passion. You know what it is that animates you. You need to follow that. Invest in your own interest. You don't have to do everything, but what you do, you have to do it with passion and heart and love and trust. Go about protecting our community. It's some time for some nationalism. We're the only ones who are going to be invested, do or die, in our own community, and we have to be the ones to see how, to envision, have that radical imagination, how we can, in this moment, in this troubled time, do what needs to be done to protect our communities, to protect our babies, to protect our seniors, to protect the most vulnerable, to protect our neighborhoods during this particularly intense time. And then lastly, as Sister Judy said, this fool in the White House got to go. At minimum, regardless of where you fall on that political spectrum, we need to show up in November. Voting isn't the end all be all, but we know the sacrifices that so many have made along the line. In many ways, it's the least that you can do in terms of political activism. But in this election, it's not going to be enough just to show up by yourself. We got to bring 1, 2, and 3 people, because we understand that voter suppression is going to be at an all-time high. We've already seen it at work, and it's only going to get worse. And they're going to use the current crisis to actually suppress the vote even further. So at minimum, we need to do that. So thank you all, our panelists. Please give them all a virtual thumbs up, applaud. And at this time, I'm going to turn it back over to our host for this wonderful panel, Ashley Henderson. Thank you, Ashley. It's yours.
Yo, can we give it up to Hasan Jeffries, who just moderated the damn thing? Like, he did that. He did that. He did that with babies running around the house. So shout out to Hasan, and shout out to my comrades on this panel. I'm actually not going to speak very long just yet. I'm going to toss it to the amazing Judy Richardson to just give us a good night from the SNCC Legacy Project. And then I'm going to talk about next steps. So for those of y'all who have been asking what's next, I promise you, hold on just a little bit longer. We're going to get there.
Okay, I'm going to do a very quick thing because I want to get it back to you. I think we really need to think about what we need to do to keep us doing the long haul, because it's going to be a long ass haul. And so what will keep you in struggle? And because we don't have the Koch brothers money, we do have 2 potential really great equalizers, right? And one is continued thoughtful organizing, and the other is the vote with all of the accountability that we know that's required. But I want to end with the words of Ms. Baker, which was, and she said, "I believe the struggle is eternal. Somebody else carries on." All right now.
That'll preach. That'll preach. All right. So next steps. So before I spill the beans, we're gonna try this poll situation. So I'm gonna launch the poll now. There's a poll in progress, and it says, "Would you be interested in a series of political education calls hosted by the SNCC Legacy Project and the Highlander Research and Education Center about contemporary issues and organizing efforts?" So we're gonna give it a couple seconds. We wanted to see, we believe in democracy and whatnot. So we wanted to see if y'all were interested in the next steps that we were kind of interested in. So we're gonna give it a couple more seconds. For those of you that are on Facebook and not on Zoom, y'all can just drop your response in the chat. And I'll tell you what the poll says. Again, the question is, would you be interested in a series of political education calls hosted by the SNCC Legacy Project and the Highlander Research and Education Center about contemporary issues and organizing efforts? And the options are absolutely, maybe, kind of depends on the issue, or nah, I'm good, like not at all, I'm good. So if you're interested, we're gonna give it like another 10 seconds for you to jump in on this poll. I'm gonna let the folks that the folks in the chat on the Facebook page are like, duh. Appreciate y'all's enthusiasm. All right, I think y'all get the point. So I'm gonna end the poll. Y'all can see that it's clearly a yeah. It's clearly a yeah. So I get to then tell you the gospel news that we're thinking about doing that anyway. So I feel blessed and so excited to be able to continue to develop this relationship that's 60 years now, officially, literally to the date, in the making, to keep coming together. So some of the issues that the SNCC Legacy Project has been talking about already is like elections and census and voter engagement and fighting against voter suppression, thinking about stuff like media and technology in this age, thinking about healthcare and so many of the other front lines of struggle that you all actually are already leading on. So I want you to be on the lookout in the next couple of weeks for an invitation to our next webinar. And we'll have you on. It's gonna be amazing. There's gonna be a lot more opportunities for interaction. And so, yeah, tell your folks, spread the word, and be on the lookout because we will be telling you about it. Also know, to the millions of you that have been in my inbox and in the chat and in the Q&A and in my Facebook messages and on Twitter, rolling into my DMs on Instagram, we absolutely did record the call. We did record the call. We can just assume from now on in the 21st century that most calls, unless we're planning something revolutionary, which then would not be on Zoom, will be recorded, right? And what we do is then after the recording, after the call, there's a follow-up email, and that follow-up email will have not only the link to the recording on Zoom, but if we live stream it on Facebook or YouTube, it'll have the link to that as well. The second thing that you should be expecting is that we usually have graphic note takers on the call. So there's a graphic that usually comes with it to show just what the themes were that came up on the call. So be on the lookout for that. And then last but certainly not least, just a reminder that the SNCC Legacy Project and all the amazing comrades that have been on the planning committee have been doing their due diligence to make sure that the actual in-person gathering happens. So again, be on the lookout for information from the SNCC Legacy Project and amplified by the Highlander Center about the in-person conference that will happen in 2021, where we all will get to be together, singing together, plotting and planning together, remembering together, literally remembering together to celebrate the legacy and the continued work of SNCC. So be on the lookout for all of that. Now, I mean, again, it both wouldn't be a Highlander call and it most definitely wouldn't be a SNCC call if we didn't close it out with some more music. So we're gonna jam it out. Y'all ready? Y'all ready for some little freedom music? I'm seeing positive affirmation, so here we go.
This city
We hope you are safe and supported. Know that you are loved, and we will see you on the next SNCC Highlander call. Y'all have a great night. Give it up for the panelists. Thank you. Give it up for yourselves. We love y'all. Solidarity and peace to you. Love and light to you. Have a great night. Have a great night. Thank y'all. SNCC, I love y'all. Josh and Hasan, I love y'all. Y'all be easy. Interpreters, we love you. Thank you. Appreciate y'all so much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, family. Thank you, Ash. Thank you. Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you. And Hasan.
Thank you,
Kind of
Ash.
threw you into the fire, huh, Judy?
So what?
Kind of threw you into the fire.
Down the living room.
I was like, oh, and then people were in the chat like demanding Courtland talk. I was like, yes.
It'd be like, I want to see your face.
All right.
You really were brilliant with this. I mean, it really was. I mean, I cannot tell you how many moderators it's like, oh, will you please shut up? You were brilliant.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Good. Oh, good. It was not
pleasure.
even easy.
All right.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you,
All right.
family.
We'll stay all night if we don't go.
Take care.
Yeah, y'all take it easy now.
Okay.